When was the last time you experienced joy with your loved one? If it's been a long time, do you find yourself frozen with fear from what might lie ahead for you and your loved one? Does it feel as if you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop? If you are, you may be allowing fear of the future to rob you of feeling joy in the present moment. Welcome to the Surviving Alzheimer's podcast. I'm your host, Ken Cardita. In this podcast, I share with you my experiences and learnings from the last 13 years as I've walked by the side of my dear wife, Shanna, as she progresses through Alzheimer's disease. It is my desire that you'll find joy and peace while learning to live with your loved one's disease, and not let the disease define you or your loved one. The Surviving Alzheimer's podcast is brought to you by Ascending Minds, LLC. Welcome to episode 22 of the Surviving Alzheimer's podcast. Today, we'll take a look at a few of the different kinds of fear that exist and what we can do to face them head on. We'll identify the different flavors of fear, as well as some of the more common sources of fear that you may be experiencing as a caregiver. We'll take a look at how this fear can sometimes hold us captive and hostage. I'll share a few of my struggles with this along the way from the past and how I dealt with them. We'll take a look at how we might reframe our perspective, contain our fear, and begin to move past it. Today's listener's comment comes from an Apple review left by Alzmate, A-L-Z-M-A-T-E. I'm going to guess that means Alzheimer's mate, and maybe they're from Australia. This is what they wrote. Priceless Help was the title. I sought out help and advice from so many books, support groups, agencies, and individuals specializing in dementia, fellow caregivers, physicians, psychologists, and so on. Your experiences and thoughts presented in your podcast are, without a doubt, those I have found most helpful in my own journey in dementia land. Thank you, and peace be with you. Thank you. Those are very kind words, and I'm always happy to hear that the podcast is really helpful to you. Now, I'm just expressing my feelings in this podcast. Caution, I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on television. I'm just a guy who loves his wife so much and who's willing to walk with her down Dementia Road. But thank you for that. I always appreciate hearing from the listeners how the podcast has been helpful to them. So thank you for taking the time to leave that very special comment. All right, let's get into today's episode. What is fear? I always go to the dictionary for these things, and this is what it tells us. As a noun, fear is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that something or someone is dangerous, likely to cause pain or cause a threat. As a verb, it means to be afraid of something that is likely to be dangerous, painful, or a threat. So when we think about fear, there's a couple of different types of fear, and they're categorized by the reaction to the fear. The first type of fear is called fight fear. This is a very active, defensive behavior. It usually results in us moving and doing something physical. On the surface, this type of fear might at first look like anger. We will examine this type of fear and how to distinguish it from anger in our next episode, which is part 2 of this 2-part series. The next type of fear is called freezing fear. This is another common fear reaction. It is more passive, in other words, non-moving. It's also a defensive behavior. Freezing can become a simple and yet very powerful avoidance strategy that can hold us at bay and cause us not to do anything. You see this in animals. When they're in fear, they freeze and they don't move and they just hope prey doesn't see them. In humans, this is more characterized physically by a very reduced heart rate and decreased movement. We're frozen and we just don't know what to do. We'll take an in-depth look at this type of fear in this episode, and I'll share with you some examples of how I work through some of those fears. Related to this fear and more intense is called a faint fear, like when you faint from fear. This is a very much a threat-related response, characterized by fainting, total physical immobility, and extreme fear in it, and basically incapacitating your body. This is rare in general population, but it is often reported in people who are suffering from severe PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. As caregivers, we can often feel overwhelmed and become burned out. And this type of fear, in some degree, may be experienced if you've ever struggled to get out of bed in the morning just to try and face another day of caring for your loved one. The last type of fear that we'll take a look at is called the flee or flight. This is an active defensive behavior, and it's essential for surviving in the face of a severe threat. The purpose of flee or flight is to create space between the threat and yourself, thereby increasing your chances of escaping. We'll take a brief look at this in part 2 as well. Let's go over 2 different situations. One, where you have the ability to do things that can actually affect the situation. And the other is totally opposite, where you have little or no control over to change the situation that's causing your fear. Let's first look at the fear of our loved one wandering and getting lost. As you will see from my experience in dealing with this, once I was able to get past my freezing fear and put things in place to help remedy the situation and change it, I was able to finally reduce my fear dramatically and overcome it. Now, when I started to look into Alzheimer's disease and the different things that could happen to those who suffer with dementia, I kept reading about that over 50% of the people who suffer from dementia or Alzheimer's will wander and get lost. This really started to freak me out quite a bit. I was very concerned. And the reasons I was concerned was we had just moved after spending 18 years in the same house and 26 years in the same neighborhood. We were in a totally new area of town. And I noticed Shanna was having a hard time knowing where we were. This became quite evident, as I've shared in previous episodes, when she would get lost in the car while she was still driving. Also, Shanna was used to being very independent. She used to always go on walks and take the dog and just go out and do things. And we also walked in the neighborhood many times. So I was hoping she would get to know her way around. So I tried my best, being the engineer that I am, to be prepared. So after some initial research, I immediately ordered a medical alert bracelet that came with a safe return policy. And what this is, your typical medical alert bracelet that you wear on your wrist. But this one said, "My name is Shanna, and I am memory impaired." And it had a number on to call and a serial number. And the safe return system would then call me if someone had found her and called that number. And she has worn that for years. In fact, she still wears that bracelet, even in a memory care center, just on the off chance that she ever gets lost. I know that someone will see that bracelet and call me. And or if Shanna gets rushed to the hospital, if she has a fall, someone in the hospital will see that bracelet and at least know she's memory impaired. That gave me some peace, but not enough. I also started looking into different wearable tracking devices. I even bought a few, tried them out, and wound up returning them as they didn't function as I thought they would, or they were too clumsy or cumbersome and Shanna wouldn't keep them on her body. So as things progressed, my fear started to grow. Then finally it happened. It was June 15th, 2020. This is what I wrote in my journal. Shanna wandered away from the house for the first time this afternoon. I left her at home with my son as she was resting and napping. I was only gone about 20 minutes. As I pulled up to the house, my son called me on the phone. He had just noticed that the front door was wide open and Shanna was no longer in the house. I quickly checked out in the backyard and got into the car to go look for her. I was able to find her in about 5 minutes. She was at the park that we often walk to about 4 blocks from our house. When I found her, she was very hot as it was 105 degrees outside. She was sweating, thirsty, and very disoriented. I'm not sure she recognized me at first. She was sobbing, but not angry. I had to grab hold of her just for a second to get her to get into the car. I calmly pleaded with her to come home with me, and she finally got into the car after a minute or so. Then I tried to talk to her, but she was still sobbing, so we just went home. After arriving home, I gave her some water and cooled her down, and then after a few minutes, she recognized that she was home, and I could tell she felt safe. I asked her a few questions, but I did not get any clear answers. I told her that I was glad that I had found her. And as I did this, I started to break down and cry. She looked at me and apologized. She realized that she had become lost and that I was upset over her being lost. I quickly got a hold of myself and reassured her that she was fine and she was okay. For the rest of the day, she was a bit somber and reflective. It's interesting. That was more than 3 years ago, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. Panic that initially set in, and even afterwards as I thought what could have happened if I didn't find her out in the heat with no water, not being able to really tell people she was lost, really instilled a lot of fear in me. But my fear and denial made me think that this was just a one-off occurrence. I was literally frozen and did nothing to prevent it from happening again. And then 2 months later, this happened. I wrote this in my journal on August the 8th. Shanna had wandered off today. She went out into the backyard and then went around the front gate and started to walk. Luckily, I was in the house and saw this whole thing happen from the window. I quickly put on my shoes and ran after her. And then we went for a short walk in the heat. When we got home, I had asked her not to do that again. I didn't make a big deal out of it while we were walking. She said okay, but I don't think she really understood what I was asking her. Here again, just 2 months later, it happened again. But this time I was fortunate to see it happen as it unfolded. Again, I thought back, what would have happened if I didn't happen to see her walk away? How long would it have taken me to notice that she was no longer in the house with me? Again, we were spared a serious situation, but again, I chose to do nothing about it. I let my fear keep me frozen. The next episode happened 3 months later. This was much more dramatic. Monday, November 9th, 2020. I just got back from finding Shanna. She had wandered off at about 5:50 p.m. as it was getting dark outside. She was still watching television in the living room, and I was in my office for a few minutes. She just got up and went out the back door and out the front gate. I got in the car and drove around for about 10 minutes in a panic, and then I finally calmed and said a prayer. And it was just when it was starting to get completely dark that I found her 1 block away from our house. I would like to think that she would have come home and made it home on her own. But I stopped and tried to get her to come into the car. At first, she seemed mad and would not get into the car when I asked her to from the window. I actually had to get out of the car and get right in front of her and finally get her into the car. In hindsight, I think she just didn't recognize me. Within a minute or two of being in the car, she was no longer mad, but she was very confused. I am grateful that she was found quickly and that my fervent prayers were answered. I tried to stay calm so that I could feel the Spirit guide me to her. I know that she was being watched over and protected. What do we do now? First thing, put a 4-digit combo lock on the front gate and make sure that I always lock both locks on the front door. And if this isn't enough, I'll add a double keyed lock to the front door. Finally, I started to do something about it. And for the most part, it worked. Shanna had a difficult time unlocking both doors much of the time. And also having the gate lock kept her from wandering through the gate. But just 1 month after that, this happened. Friday, December 4th, 2020. Shanna did wander off again tonight at about 4:45 p.m. as I was barbecuing in the backyard. I was only back there for just a few minutes, and she went out the front door. She must have figured out how to unlock it. It took me over 20 minutes of driving in the car to find her about 3/4 of a mile away from our house. When I pulled over, she was cold and crying. She was very disoriented. When I got her home, I calmly talked to her. She did not know why she took off, and she felt bad about it. I was only able to find her by remaining calm and allowing the Spirit to direct me. I am going to change the lock on the front door and to the door to the garage so that you need a key to get out and in from both sides. I hope that this, along with locking the gate, will further prevent any of these episodes. And I did it. It took me 5 months and 4 big, scary incidents to finally put a solution in place that would solve the problem. In retrospect, not only was I frozen with fear of what might happen, I was in denial that this was a real thing and that this was part of our journey. I wasn't willing to accept it and lock ourselves into the house, basically, for our own safety. But once this was done, the fear of her wandering away went away because it never happened again. I was diligent about keeping those doors locked from the inside. And yes, it was a pain to always have to pull out my keys to leave the house, but I knew keeping those doors locked would keep Shanna safe at home. Now, we always left the back door unlocked, that in case of a fire or an emergency, we could go out into the backyard. This is an example of knowing what might come, and when we begin to see it, we become frozen by fear. And we use denial to tell ourselves that this is just a one-off thing. Now, I will always be grateful that each time I went to find Shanna, my prayers were answered. And she was found in less than half an hour each time. And nothing really seriously happened to Shanna. I realized this could have turned out much worse, and I am grateful that Shanna was kept safe. Now let's look at a situation where we have minimal and sometimes no ability to control the causes of our fears and provide a solution. Let's take a look at fear that is driven by what is going on around us in the world. In my lifetime, the greatest calamity and extended period of fear and uncertainty that the world has ever experienced was the recent COVID-19 pandemic. We all lived through this over the last few years. Now, usually I don't get too concerned about things in the world. I've always had the perspective of I focus on what I can control in my life and I don't really worry about what I can't control. But the COVID-19 pandemic did get the best of me. Some of the things that I feared were running out of the basic necessities like food. I have vivid memories of going to the grocery stores and seeing the shelves bare and only a couple of items that were left, and thinking, how much food do I have at home and how long can we go on? Now, luckily, I always have a decent amount of food storage for emergencies, but it really made me think. Toilet paper, that was one of the hottest commodities. I chuckled at that. I really didn't have to worry about it because I recently went to Costco and bought toilet paper, and that was enough to last for quite a while. But as I saw what I thought was funny become a real concern for a lot of people, it started to generate some fear and anxiety in me. Didn't help that I lost a significant amount of money in my retirement accounts. And I often thought, what would happen if I got COVID or I got really sick? Who would take care of Shanna? Never mind the stresses if Shanna got COVID and had to go to the hospital and I couldn't be with her and she couldn't talk to people. So as I imagined these things, the fear began to grow. As time went on, I had fear that the isolation that we were experiencing would never end, and how bad things were becoming all over the world. At the low point for me, which happened towards the beginning of the pandemic, this is what I wrote in my journal. At this time, it seems that I am in full-blown caregiver burnout. I'm stressed over all of the effects of the coronavirus. Losing so much money in our retirement accounts, 10% today alone, with no hope in sight of recovery. Panic is all around us. I focused on getting our water drums ready for water storage and making sure we had more food ordered online to stock up. I am on a hair trigger with my emotion. This morning, I did find some peace in gospel readings. But then later in the day, our church announced that it suspended all public meetings worldwide as a precaution to try to control the spread of the virus. This really freaked me out. I am really a wreck. I'm battling burnout, depression, feeling trapped, being bored. I really have to double down in my efforts to stay close to the Spirit, as this is not a good place to be. I don't know how you experienced the COVID-19 pandemic. Were you fearful? Were you afraid for your loved one? The fear became very crippling to me. It almost turned into the fainting type of fear at times. When I was finally at my breaking point, not long after I made this journal entry, I made some key decisions that helped pull myself out of this deep, dark hole of depression and fear. What I did was I chose to change my focus and my thoughts. This directly affected my feelings and emotions and resulted in different actions that I took. And over time, this resulted in pulling myself out of this pit of depression to finally a state of peace and feeling safe over the course of the following months. Some of the things that I chose to do was to stop feeding on the daily negative barrage of doom and gloom that was coming on the news. I stopped watching the news 24/7. I stopped looking at the COVID statistics on the Johns Hopkins website multiple times a day. From a financial perspective, I realized that I had survived the dot-com crash in 2001 and the financial crisis of 2007. And both times, eventually my retirement accounts were covered. And I would hope that this would also happen. And indeed it did in less than a year. I did all in my power to minimize my exposure to the outside world as well as Shanna's, so that we could minimize our risk of getting the disease. I became at peace with the fact that I was doing all that I could that was in my power to protect us, and I would leave the rest to God. I put all my faith in God that we would deal with any sickness if it might come our way. To this date, many of my children and their families have gotten COVID. Fortunately, there were no lasting effects. But so far, Shanna and I have been spared. It's actually been a couple of years since I have let the fear of the pandemic cripple me. I realize that we have been blessed so far, and that many other families have dealt with severe sickness and even loss of loved ones. I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. Probably the biggest one was to lean on my faith in God and do all that I can, and not let the fear drive me into depression. My takeaway on all of this is that worrying and being frozen by fear does nothing to prevent anything that you're afraid of, especially when things go way beyond your own control. I have learned that by taking action to the best of my ability and then putting my trust in God has helped me face fear head on and survive. Whether it's putting double-keyed locks on the door or struggling through the worldwide pandemic, worry and fear never leads to feeling peace. This can best be summarized by a post that I left on the Caregivers Facebook page almost a year ago, when it was the first anniversary of Shanna moving out of the house and into memory care. This is what I wrote. My motto has become, I refuse to let grief from her decline or fear of what lies ahead to rob me of the joy that can be had today. I choose to squeeze out every ounce of joy and connection that we can still experience together. This has made all the difference. We'll talk more about this, things that made the difference, in our next episode. But until then, I hope and pray that you can face your fears head on, put your trust in your higher power, and be able to keep your fears in check and find peace again. Thanks for watching an episode of the Surviving Alzheimer's podcast. If you're new to this podcast, I recommend that you watch the first 13 episodes in order. That way you can learn about our backstory. This will make understanding later episodes much easier. To help you with this, I've created a playlist. It's called Surviving Alzheimer's Podcast in Order. That way you can listen to all the episodes in the order that they were created. The mission of the Surviving Alzheimer's Podcast is to educate and inspire caregivers, family, and friends who are on their own unique journey down Dementia Road with their loved ones. I would really appreciate it if you could share this episode to anyone who you feel would benefit from it. Additional ways for you to help us reach others are to hit the like button for this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell to be notified of new episodes. All of these actions will encourage the YouTube algorithm to share this episode and podcast to other potential viewers.